Hi, I'm Shawna.
And I'm Liz.
Welcome to Getting Bookish, a weekly podcast where we will talk about different book-related topics, let you know what we're reading, and even answer Q&As from you.
Be sure to visit our website, gettingbookish.com, and check us out on Facebook and Instagram at Getting Bookish. If you enjoy our podcast, we'd love for you to subscribe and leave us a rating and review, which helps us to be seen by other book lovers.
With all that said, we hope you'll enjoy Getting Bookish with us.
Enjoy the podcast.
Hello, friends, and thank you for joining us on another episode of Getting Bookish. And this is kind of a special episode because it's our last one before we officially start our season 2, which we are so excited about. We have tried to get on some different guests that have different perspectives on reading. And our first guest, I'm really excited to share his insight with you, is a friend of mine, Commodore, and he actually narrates these wonderful books that you listen to on Audible. So it'll be fun to hear that side of things. So be sure to continue tuning in to listen to our season 2. We've got some great guests coming up. And be sure to listen to the whole episode today, which I know you do anyway, because Liz and I have something really exciting that we are going to be doing together, and we're going to share it with you. So be sure to listen, and we would love to have you join in with us. So we'll let you know what we're talking about in a little bit. So as far as this past month in September has been going, it's funny, I saw a meme because I'm in Florida and it's just hot all the time. Did you see it? I don't know if you saw me post it.
I did, yeah.
It called it, we're leaving Sweat-tember and entering Hot-tober. Because it's so hot and my kids want to be like PJ Masks characters for Halloween. And I'm like, it's just so hot. Like, you need to be like a surfer for Halloween here in Florida. Literally on Halloween, it's hot. Like, sweating hot.
That's so funny because in Colorado, kids usually have to get their costumes like a size too big because they have to be able to wear their coat underneath. Oh. So what a different world we live in.
I would love that. Oh, that would be so amazing.
Right? Although I do have to say that for the past few days, it's been rather warm here. It does not feel like fall. I just want to wear scarves and drink hot beverages and curl up with a book. And I mean, I'm still reading, but it's not the same.
I think if it doesn't cool down for both of us, we're going to have to set our temperatures down to like 60. And then we can be on here wearing our like cold winter stuff.
Yes.
And hot chocolate.
I love that.
All right. So Liz, what books did you finish from our last podcast that you were working on?
All right. So I finished, so last month and then the beginning of this month, I was doing the Raven reread. And so I finished Blue Lily, Lily Blue, which I actually read back to back. And so I reviewed it on the last Getting Bookish brief. And that was a 5-star book for me, of course. And if you read a book back to back, odds are you loved it. And so I finished that, and then I finished Barnum, An American Life, and that is by Robert Wilson. And that book was so enlightening for me because I am kind of nerdy about like circus history, and I really enjoy reading things like that. And so I had this very specific idea of the kind of person P.T. Barnum was in my mind. And although he still is that person, this biography was fantastic because it just showed so many more sides of who he was, and that he thought those deplorable things he did were deplorable, and he was sorry that he had done them later in his life. And so it was really, I don't read a lot of biographies, and so I was like, oh, I love that I'm learning so much about this person. And so that one I gave 4 stars too. So it was a really fun read and a breakaway from my norm. Because like I said, I'm not even sure what the last biography that I read was. It's been that long.
Wow.
Biography, autobiography, memoir.
Yeah.
I don't even know. Like, this is it. So that is what I finished from last month. What did you finish?
All right. So as far as the books that I finished, it's actually really sad. The book that I was super excited about reading, The Story Peddler, that had that beautiful cover, it's gone. Like,
Oh,
a
no!
magician came and made it disappear. I have no idea where it went. And I was so upset because I was really getting into the story. I can't find it anywhere. Now thinking about it, it's probably somewhere in my daughter's room because that's like a magical cover that I think I need to check her room. There's probably a stack of books of mine tucked under her bed somewhere. So I don't have that one to continue talking about it. I need to go find it. The other one, and I can't remember if I was in the middle of reading this, so I apologize if I already talked about this in the last podcast, so I'll just briefly go through it because it's not even worth spending a lot of time on it. It's called I Found You by Lisa Jewell. And just no. It's just a no. So
no.
And I can't remember if I was in the middle of it or whatever. So I'm just going to give it just this quick. I honestly don't even remember much about it because it wasn't very memorable. So I'm just going to say it's just a no. So with that, Liz, what have you read for the month of September?
All right. So I actually feel like I got back into my reading groove a little bit this month. And I think, honestly, it's because it's a little bit cooler. Mm-hmm. Not a lot cooler, but a little bit cooler. And it makes me like want to sit and read because it feels very appropriate for the seasons. So, I actually have books to show you guys this month. So the first and second book I read this month, of course, this is the last book in the Raven cycle. This one is The Raven King. It's book 4. And obviously you guys have been listening to me rave about this series while I've been doing this reread. And it was fantastic. But I just remember like coming up to this book when it was just released and then my very first time reading it. And I was so nervous that this series that I loved like wasn't going to get a proper ending, but it really is amazing. So 5 stars, of course. And it makes me even more excited because 2 of the characters from this series are getting their own series.
Oh, like a spinoff.
Yes. And so the first book is called Call Down the Hawk, and it comes out at the beginning of next month. So I am so excited. And I got to read the first 5 chapters of that one as a preview, and it's going to be so good. I'm so excited. So, so that was the first and second book that I read this month because I read them.
Do you think they'll ever make it into a movie?
I hope not. I know that
was going to be my second question.
Right. I know that there is a movie studio who has bought the rights to it.
Oh, no.
But it was quite a few years ago, and they haven't moved forward with developing it into...
It takes a while to get...
I know. But when people ask the author, she's like, they haven't started with anything yet. And so I hope not, because I feel like I'm going to watch it, but it's going to be a train wreck because it's always a train wreck. And then I'm going to be angry about it. And so I really hope that it never finds its way to a screen anywhere. But if it does, then hopefully it'll be good.
I know. Well, it's really hard when you're so attached to the way things are in the book, especially because you've reread it a million times. Like, you could rewrite the book if you had to. Like, if all books were taken and you still wanted the story, you could probably rewrite it between, you know, you and your friend that read it all the time.
Right. We probably could.
But if you watch a show, or a movie, there's only so much they can put in, and you'll be like, that's not it.
Right. And I know
or the characters, the cast.
Right. So, like, we look at, my friend and I, who reread these all the time, we look at, like, even the fan art, and we're always like, well, that's not what that character looks like. Yeah. And so even, like, an artist's eye, like, it doesn't even have to be a real person. We're still like, nope. So Yeah, I really hope it never makes its way onto a screen. But if it does, I will try to be understanding. So the third book I read this month is a beast. This book is enormous.
Oh, wow.
It's actually even heavy to hold up here. So this is Sarah J. Maas is a fantastic writer of fantasy novels. Her other series, Throne of Glass, I had to think about it for a second. Throne of Glass is one of my favorite fantasy series. And then she wrote this series, and it takes place like in a fairy kingdom. And I read the first one, and I wasn't impressed. It wasn't my favorite. And like, it was a good book, but I wasn't going to read anymore. And a friend of mine, she's like, have you read this yet? And I'm like, no. And she's like, the second book is so good. I'm like, the second book is never better than the first. And the first wasn't that great. And she's like, no, you have to read the second book. And I'm so glad that she said that, because this book was so much better than the first one. And so if you've read the first one, whose title I can't remember right now, otherwise I would absolutely say it. But if you've read the first one and you're like, nah, that was just okay, the second one is phenomenal. And so I was really, really thankful that I read it. And I mean, it's huge. It's over 600 pages. And there was only one part that I was like, oh, this part's kind of slow. Otherwise, like, it just, so much was going on that I just read it so fast, even though it's a beast of a book. It's one of those that you can't hold in one hand while you're reading it. All right. So the next book I read, I actually talked about a little bit last month.
I remember that.
Because I had started it, and then I completely lost interest in it, so I put it aside, and then I restarted it again, and okay. So so the book's called Gods of Jade and Shadow.
This is the retelling, right?
Yeah, so it's like a Mexican folklore story, and about a god whose brother has like trapped him in this magical trunk, and then this girl, her grandfather was in charge of watching the trunk, and she accidentally lets the god out. And when it started, it was so good, because I love folklore. I love retellings. It takes place in the 1920s, so it's this very like glamorous time period. And I was like, I am going to love this book. And it was so dry.
Oh no.
So the two main characters are like on this journey together, and they have zero chemistry. And I don't even mean like romantic chemistry. Like, all of their interactions together are so boring. Like, I just don't care. Like, the way they talk to each other is so like cold and uncomfortable that you would think, like, if they were two characters that hated each other, it would be perfectly well done, but they're not supposed to hate each other. And so it's just this kind of awkward read. And so I gave it 3 stars because it does have a great ending. But so if you're halfway through it and you're like, I'm not enjoying this, it's definitely worth finishing. I just struggled because it kind of read like so innocent that it seems like it would be a children's book, except for it's definitely not a children's book. And so just like, I could just never quite find my footing with this.
That's too bad.
So I know, I was really bummed because I was really just certain that I was going to absolutely love it, and that wasn't the case. But right behind that, I read this, which was amazing. I read it in a day and a half. Like, I read the actual physical book in a day and a half, and I never read physical books that fast. So this is called Sorcery of Thorns. It's by Margaret Rogerson. And I gave it 5 stars. And at first I was like, I'm not going to give it 5 stars because, you know, the plot's kind of cliche. And then I was like, no, I'm going to give it 5 stars because I loved this book. Like, it didn't matter that there are maybe a dozen other books that are very, very similar because I loved this one.
Yeah.
And so I'm part of that. So the main character's name is Elizabeth. And so I was already like partial to her. But it takes place in these great libraries. And the libraries don't even have they have regular books, but they're specifically like for spell books. And so they have to like keep them like under chains or in these iron boxes. And so it's really exciting. And she's been taught her whole life that sorcerers are evil, like the people who use the spell books, they're terrible people. And she ends up through an unfortunate series of events, which is kind of a theme in the books that I read this month. Through an unfortunate series of events, she ends up like being partnered up with this sorcerer, and chaos ensues. They save the world. It was a super, super fun book. So definitely 5 stars. The only thing I had a little bit of problem with was it was very plot driven. And so I kind of wanted more character development, but it was still very, very good. All right. So I have a couple more that I finished. Here's this one. It has such a pretty cover.
All of these are great covers.
I know they're so metallic that the lights catch them so much. So this is Serpent and Dove, which I actually listened to. I have the physical book, but I just got it yesterday in the mail. It came in one of my book subscription boxes, and I wish I would have had the physical book while I was reading it, because I did not like the narrator. It was both a man and a woman do the narration, and they switch back and forth. And it just, when they do each other's voices, it was terrible. Like when they're reading the dialogue loud, I'm just like, oh my goodness, I hate this. And so, so it kept kind of pulling me out of the story. And so I think if I would have had the physical book, I would have just switched over to the physical book and it would have been fine. But even with that problem, I still gave this 4 stars. It was super, super fun. I feel like it was a really appropriate time of year to read lots of stories about witches this month for some reason. And so,
gearing up for Halloween.
Exactly. And so this is another one about a witch. So the girl, Lou, she's like a street rat. She steals for a living, and she's like a witch in disguise. And then the man in the story, Reed, he's very proper. His life is completely run by protocol, and he is a witch hunter. And through an unfortunate series of events, they end up having to get married. That happens in like the first 30 pages of the book. So like the book is funny and chaotic, and I mean, you can just imagine with these two people, like here she is, a witch, and that's like the thing that he despises the most, and they end up like accidentally married. So it was super fun. It was told in first person, which isn't my most favorite. So but really, I think the reason I gave it 4 stars was just because it was really hard to listen to it. So if you guys have the option and you want to read it, because it really was an amazing book, definitely read it and skip the audio version.
I'm surprised you continued with it, because if I can't listen to it, I just can't.
There were times but the book was so good. Yeah. Like I was enjoying the story so much, I didn't want to stop reading it, but there were times when I was like, really? That's how you're going to do her voice right now? Really?
Do you think you'll ever read it to see if you feel differently about it?
Maybe.
That'd be
I
interesting.
might. I mean, I have the actual book now, but we'll just have to see. We'll have to see how things go. I keep saying that maybe next year I'll just reread. Like that's all I'll do all year.
Yeah.
We'll see if that happens. So the next book I read was also a reread, actually. It was on audio, and I hadn't listened to it on audio before. The book is called Reckless, and it's by Cornelia Funke. And I think we've maybe talked about it before. It's a book that I really, really enjoyed. It's set in mirror world, and so that's how you access it from our world, as you walk through a mirror, which is very kind of Alice in Wonderland-esque. But there's a lot of really fun like tie-ins from all different kinds of like fairy tales and stories from folklore. And it's about this boy, and his name is Jacob, Reckless, and he has to like go on this adventure essentially to save his brother. And it's a really fun book, and I've been recommending it for boys who like to read fantasy books but don't want to read romance, because there's essentially zero romance in these books. And then all of a sudden I was like, maybe I should re-listen to those. So when I'm making recommendations, I like really remember what all happened. And so it was just really fun to re-listen to the story. And like I said, it's a really great book for boys who like those fantasy stories, but don't want to read a lot of like romance and things of that nature. But I would say it's definitely for like middle school and up. I wouldn't really recommend it to like a fourth or a fifth grader. Not reading level wise, but just kind of some of that
maturity
crazy
wise
content. Yes. All right. So I'm actually going to count this in the red category because I only have like 6 pages left.
But you couldn't finish it?
It was time to record the podcast. So I have not finished it, but it is amazing. I started this last night.
Wow.
Yeah. And like I did stuff today. I didn't just sit and read, but I wanted to just sit and read because the book, like, it pulled me in from the very beginning. It's about this group of people. So their fantasy kingdom is kind of broken up into all these groups. And so they're the lowest of the low, but they're also the only group that's unaffected by this sickness that's happening. And so they're the ones that have to go in and take care of these people and like prepare their funeral pyres and everything. Because otherwise anybody else that's around them would get this sickness. And so they're the lowest of the low, but they're also the ones that are pretty much taking care of the whole kingdom. And right from the very beginning, something kind of crazy happens. I'm not going to say what it is, even though it does happen like right at the beginning, but something kind of crazy happens and it just kind of is like spins everything out of control. But it's so well balanced. The plot and the character development and the world building are just so well balanced, and I just literally couldn't put it down, which is why I only have 6 pages left. So let's go fast. No, I'm just teasing. But this is by Margaret Owen, and I'm sure nothing is going to change my mind in the last few pages, and so this is definitely a 5-star. 5-star review from me.
Yay.
So that is what I read this month. I feel like I actually read books and had things to talk about.
Yeah, and not only that, but you have a lot that were in the 4 and 5-star category.
Yeah.
That's always a good month.
Exactly. And I think that part of that is due to the fact that I didn't really read a lot of things that were outside of my normal reading comfort zone this month. And so they were easy for me to love because they're the kinds of books that I love to read. So that's very selfish of me.
But it's what you love.
It's what I love. So anyway, I super enjoyed the books that I read this month. Good. Did you read lots of fun things as well?
I read more than I did last month, which was a very small number, but I didn't have a great month.
Oh, no.
Yes. We're going to start with The Beast's Heart. Now, this is by Leaf Shallcross. And I actually listened to it, so I'm going to show you a picture of the book here because it's got a beautiful cover. If you can see that, it's got a castle. This is a Beauty and the Beast retell. Okay. And I was really excited because I have never read a retell before. Like, or maybe I have and I didn't know, but this is the first one that I knew it was.
Yeah.
And so I was super excited, and it's told from the Beast's perspective, and he's nice. Like, he has no ill will towards anything. And so I'm like, okay, this is interesting. The first 25%, and I think I even put this on Goodreads, I was like, this is amazing. And so I'm listening to it. It's narrated by Jim Dale.
Okay. Love him.
Yeah. And so I'm like, this is great. He does a great voice for Beast. I'm usually not a fan of him doing female voices, but it wasn't too bad for Belle. I didn't mind it. I thought he did a really good job. So the first 25%, I was like, this is so awesome. This is going to be my pick of the month for sure. And then it just kind of never went anywhere. Like, the Beast was nice, so we didn't have that conflict. He wasn't keeping her under, like, you know, he wasn't keeping her there like a prisoner. He was basically like, hey, I'm lonely. Can you stay with me? And she's like, well, for how long? And he says, I don't know, a year? She's like, okay, yeah, I'll stay a year. But basically throughout, he's like, you can go. And she's like, oh, I'll stay. And then it wasn't like, you know how in Beauty and the Beast, they have to fall in love before that final petal hits the table, right? That's right. The time, right? There was nothing like that. It was just, they have to fall in love sometime before he dies. And that's what will break the curse. So there's no urgency, and there's no like real conflict. And then it started getting a little uncomfortable towards the end, because now the Beast is like, I've fallen in love with her. And he asks her every night, will you marry me? And she's like, no, I'm sorry. And then he's like, gets mad, or not mad, but he gets frustrated and he goes off to his room. Then he's like, okay, well, I'm just going to ask you tomorrow. And she's like, could you not ask me tomorrow? Because I'm still going to say no. And so tomorrow at dinner, he's like, will you marry me? And she's like, no, stop asking. He's like, I will never stop asking until you say yes. So now it's kind of to that point where it's like, well, now this is just sounding desperate. And it just, like, you never really fell in love with the Beast, and you never fell in love with her either. So, and you and I were talking about this before, and I was like, I don't know why I didn't like it. And you were like, because there's no bad guy. Like, a fairy tale needs to have a bad guy, like an evil stepmother or evil queen or witch or something, to have that conflict. And there was just nothing. And I don't even know how I finished it, but I did. And I'm very let down by that.
That's so frustrating.
Yeah. So I gave that 2 stars, and I think that was generous. I think I gave it 2 stars for Jim Dale reading it. So, let's see. The next one I read, or I listened to, this one also, is called Never Broken, Songs Are Only Half the Story. And it's Jewel's memoir. So Jewel, the singer.
Okay.
And it's about her life growing up and all this stuff. I was so excited because I'm not a super fan of Jewel, but I do like her music. It's that, singer-songwriter kind of folk music. And I just always like learning about people's lives. So it was recommended to me at my last literary society. And of course, it's a memoir. I'm all in. It's Jewel. Let's go. Let's start with what I gave it. I gave it 2 stars. So I think my problem was, so when I'm reading a memoir, this is what I look for. I want to know your dirty laundry. And maybe that's why I like memoirs, because people share their secrets. People share the skeletons in their closets. That's what it's for, right? To like let that out and to share with people. People want to hear that nitty gritty stuff. Like you were reading Barnum, and it shared some sordid details of his past.
Oh, yeah.
Well, it was very just kind of light and fluffy. I mean, she did have a pretty rough upbringing, but it was like, there was like this much of her actual life, and then this much of her talking about how like it made her feel, or how it's so hard to explain. Like when I read a memoir, I want people to talk to me through it or as I'm reading it as if they are in that moment. And I want to know like how you were in that moment, not not why you think you felt that way, because later on as you've gotten older, you've healed from that and you've had therapy, and now you can say, well, you know what, I realized I was probably angry like that because my father was abusive or whatever.
Yeah.
I don't need the self-help in there. I don't like self-help books. And that's what it felt like. Like she was analyzing why she felt the way she did instead of just telling me the story of her growing up. And it got really frustrating. And so then I was really interested to hear about her marriage with Ty Morgan, who is the rodeo guy. And it was like, yeah, and then Ty and I got married and we were great together. And then we got a divorce and we were great apart too. And then we moved on. I'm like, hold on. You can't write a memoir and expect people to buy it and not have the juicy details in here. There's like nothing. Right. I'm like, you're not revealing anything. Aren't memoirs supposed to be revealing of the person they're about?
I would think so.
Know. So I don't know. Maybe I'm being too harsh on it, but it did not have the same, it did not make me feel, I don't know, moving on. But if you do listen to it, she's the one that reads it and she sings some of her songs throughout it. So that is a bonus.
Well, that's fun.
Maybe that's why I gave you the 2 stars. Okay. Next one I read was The Handmaid's Tale by Margaret Atwood.
Yes.
Because
What'd you think?
Have you read it?
Yeah.
So I had watched an episode a long time ago of the show. I didn't know it was a book. I'd never heard of it. And I was like, this is the weirdest thing I've ever seen. And then I knew it was a book. So I was like, let me read the book and see what happens. I basically have zero feelings about it. Like, it's so new. I didn't hate it, but I didn't love it. I don't even think I liked it. But it's not to the point where I'm like, that was a terrible book. It was just like, and now I'm done with that one. I don't know. I don't know what to think. It left off on such a weird spot. Like, I'm like, well, what happened? What happened to her? Where did she go? Like, I don't know what happened. And it was written so long ago. And I know she wrote a sequel, but the sequel was written recently.
Yeah, so it just came out 2 weeks ago.
Yeah. So I'm like, anybody who read this like in the 80s and want to know what happened, well, too bad. You got to wait like 30 years. I thought it was interesting in some parts. I don't know. What did you feel about it?
It's an interesting remark, especially for that time period. So like for the fact that it was written so long ago, like way before kind of like dystopian novels became like a thing, like a trend. It was really interesting in that time to write it. I think it's an interesting kind of comment on society at large. I didn't like it because I don't like books like that. I don't enjoy things that are real gritty. I feel like the whole context of that book is essentially about these women who are bought and become slaves and can be treated however they decide to treat them, which is horribly. Yeah. And it made me feel icky. And that's another reason why I can't watch the show. I've seen a couple of episodes, but it makes me feel icky. And so it's just, I felt not my kind of book.
I definitely felt that way too. So I don't know if I will read the sequel. Probably not. I'm not even, it doesn't even excite me to watch the series. So I think I'm just going to move on.
Yeah.
I don't even know why I read it. It was just like, oh, let me just read this. It's, people are talking about it. So let me just read it.
Trendy.
The next one is, it's The Raven Boys. And I have the book right here.
There it is.
Now, I do have to say something about the cover. Now, you know how we talk about we don't like when books have movie posters on the covers. So if there's two options, one has the movie and one is the original, we'll choose the original.
Right.
I'm not a fan of covers with people either on the front, but I know there is a book that doesn't have the people, because I think I've seen you have it.
I think, yeah, the hardback doesn't have people on it.
So I'm like, I want the hardback.
It might make you feel better, though, to know that Maggie Stiefvater, the author, did the art.
She drew this?
Yes.
Oh, well, that does make it better.
Right. So then it's at least like...
Well, after reading the book, I was a little bit less upset, because like I'm like, okay, I know who these people are, but typically I would have just
I'm completely with you.
I'd just like art like that.
Yeah.
I think it goes along with, I like to create everything in my head. And so when there's people on the front, it's kind of like the movie. If a book is a movie, don't tell me who even the actors are, because you'll ruin it when I read it. But that's interesting to know that the author drew it, and this is how she sees the characters. So that makes it a little bit better.
Yes.
Okay, so the reason I read this book is because Liz is talking about it nonstop, which is great because it's her favorite book. And so I thought, you know what, even if I absolutely hate it, at least I know what she's talking about when she's saying these character names and going on about the book. So I read it, and it's definitely out of my comfort zone. I don't read a lot of YA fantasy. I'm not opposed to it, but I just don't read a lot of it. I am not the huge fan like Liz is, which like kills me to say, because I wanted to be like, I loved it so much. But the reason is, and I talked to her about this before, is because it's very heavy on clairvoyance and mediums and psychics and all of that stuff. And that's the only reason, really, why I couldn't fully jump into it and connect with it. I just don't read books like that. So that was the only thing. Other than that, I thought learning about the different characters was fun. And I feel like in this book, she gives you little nuggets here and there to keep you like interested and like figuring out like, oh, well, what is this for? You know, like, what is this person doing? And so I thought that was really great. Yeah, so I gave this, I don't even know if I started on Goodreads. Oh, I gave it 4 stars. I gave it 4 stars. So I am just happy that I read a book that Liz loves, and now I feel like a little bit more cool and in the know of things.
I do want to encourage anybody that's like read the first one. Like, that's another series where the second one, well, the second book is amazing anyway. Mm-hmm. I mean, and that's obviously, I'm not an impartial judge of this, but you really get to see what an amazing writer she is, because all of those like little nuggets that you like got to see in the first book, like it's like they're tiny little seeds that bloom in the second book, and you're like, whoa, like I didn't know that this little thing was going to become this big thing. And so she really is an amazing author. And so even if you're not like 100% like sold out for the storyline, like just getting to see how she crafts the books is also very rewarding.
And you also said that the reading on Audible was really good, didn't you?
Yes, I
love
more of
a listener.
Mm-hmm. The first couple of times I read the series, I read the books, and then I listened to the first one, and I was like, oh my goodness. Like, it brought even more to the story. I don't even know how to explain it, but yeah, I love the audio versions also. You know, I'm just obsessive over here.
All right, so the next one that I read, this one was also recommended to me at my literary society, and because I haven't talked about a World War II book yet, you knew it was coming, Lilac Girls. And this is by Martha Hall Kelly. So this is historical fiction based on true stories of 3 women. One, and obviously World War II, back in the 40s. One of the women works at the American consulate, I believe in New York. The other one is a young Polish girl. And another one turns out to be a German, I don't know what they were called, but like a female Nazi like person. She was a nurse. And so what happened to these girls in Poland is they went to the Ravensbrück concentration camp, and it was just for females. And they did experiments on them there. And they were called the Ravensbrück rabbits because when they did these experiments, it would make them hop around the camp because they would take meat out of their legs, or they would insert shrapnel and glass and dirt and typhus into their legs. And so it would make them, limping and hopping all over the place. So it's kind of how these three lives all kind of interconnect through the story. Right up my alley. It's like
I'm horrified. So I was like, yay!
I'm like, this. I don't like to say I was excited to read this, but I was like, I'm going to learn something new. Plus, on the very front of it, it says, should appeal strongly to readers of Kristen Hannon's The Nightingale and Anthony Doerr's All the Light We Cannot See, which, hello, so I'm like, this is going to be so great. And I'm so disappointed.
Oh, no.
I'm so disappointed. There was a lot of stuff before. There was a lot of setup that just went on way too long. And there were scenes that didn't need to be in there. There were shock value scenes, which annoys me as a reader. I'm like, this very weird scene does not need to be in here if it has no support for the story, right? It's just in there for like the shock. And then there was the occurrence of the concentration camp. And then there was a ton afterwards that really went nowhere. There was this odd romance that kind of flowed through, which really ended up being nothing. And there was just kind of nothing there, but it alluded to that there was something. I don't know. It was weird. And it was... like I was saying to people at our literary society, I was like, if I recommended this book, I'd be like, here, read like this part right here in the middle. Don't read over here. Don't read the end. Just read this, the 100 pages in the middle, and that's all you need to read. So I was pretty disappointed. In that book. I really liked learning something I didn't know. Like I didn't know that there was the Ravensbrück rabbits. And I would like to do more research just on that. But as far as the story, I was sad. Almost done here. So then the next one I have is Chinese Cinderella. This is by Adeline Yen Ma. Chinese Cinderella. I did not know this was a YA book until I finished it. And at the very end, she said something like... I'm paraphrasing. She basically said, this is the one for younger readers. If you would want to read the more adult version with more detail, read Falling Leaves. And that's the more adult version of the memoir. And I was like, oh man. And she also explained something at the end, which I don't want to say if anybody wants to read this book, but it's basically about this little girl. And this takes place in the 40s also. This little girl, she is unwanted because she is the last child that was born, and then her mother died like 3 days later. So her entire family blames her for her mother's death, and they treat her horribly. Even the dad, he gets married to this lady who treats her like absolute dirt. And they have 2 children between them, the dad and then the stepmom, and they don't care if she walks home in the, rainstorms. They don't care if she's forgotten. They don't care. And she's like, 3 and 4 and 5 when all this is happening, all the way up until she's about 14 or 15. And there was this one particular scene, they all got little ducklings, and her little duckling was her best friend. And she loved this little duckling because it was the only thing that was hers. Like, she got nothing else. She didn't get to eat with the family, nothing. Nobody talked to her. They were mean to her. And so she had this little duckling. And then one day the dad said, let's check out and see if our German Shepherd is, trained well enough. And so he asked one of the brothers, go pick out a duckling. So, of course, the brother runs up. There's like 6 other children. The brother runs up there, so he can pick from 7 ducklings. He picks hers, of course, and throws it down in front of the dog. And the little duckling starts walking over to her because they've formed this little cute bond. And that was enough for the German Shepherd to set its sights on the little duckling. And then her friend was no more. And it was so sad because I'm like, this little girl's 5 years old. How horrific. So, that was the YA version. Maybe I can't read the adult one. Right? I don't even know where I got this book, actually. It was on my shelf, and I was like, what is this? I don't even know where this came from, so I'm going to read it. Surprise. The last one is called The Glass Castle. And that one, let me see, is written by Jeanette Walls. And if you want to listen to it, she's the reader also. So that, again, another memoir. And this, again, it's the children. It's these children who are brought up in these horrible situations. And I'm like, how are you even alive right now? These children, there's 4 of them. They grew up in, like, their dad's a drunk and their mom is just like this free spirit person. And I feel like it's hard because I feel like in their own way, they care about their children and they love them and they think they're doing a good job. But they're really not. Like, at any point, if any real CPS or DCF person rode by, they would take the children in a second. I mean, there's abuse, there's, there's sexual abuse, there's neglect, and, all of these things. So it's hard to say, well, how could they really love them? But then you see, like, little things that they try to do. And, of course, the disease of alcohol, also plays into that. But anyway, so that was obviously based on a true story. After I read the book, I watched the movie, which I had never seen before. And you haven't seen the movie?
Mm-mm.
You've read the book though, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so I thought they picked the perfect person for the dad. If you don't like to know characters, skip past this one. It's Woody Harrelson. And he plays a phenomenal drunk, like in Hunger Games.
He does.
It's amazing. I'm like, this is like perfect casting right here. It was interesting how they did the movie compared to the book. Like, the book is obviously moving through her life. The movie, it's showing her as a businesswoman and she's remembering these occurrences. So it's kind of different how they did the book. So I thought that was pretty interesting as well. So that is everything that I have read. Liz, what are you currently reading?
All right. So, I mean, I technically am currently reading The Merciful Crow. But in addition to that, I am currently reading The Road Back to You. I don't read a lot of nonfiction books, but this is the book written about the Enneagram. And it's been really interesting. I've been kind of just picking and choosing. I'm obviously most interested in myself, so I read my chapter. But it really is interesting. I mean, in general, it's so trendy to talk about the Enneagram and your number and everything right now. And so it just has been kind of a fascinating book to read. I'm not sure I will finish it because I'm not sure I'm going to read all of the numbers at length, but mine has been very interesting. And then I just started Shadow and Bone, which is a reread that I'm doing with a friend of mine this month. And it's by Leigh Bardugo. Actually, hold on. Yes. All of a sudden I was like, I don't know if I have that author right. All right. It's by Leigh Bardugo, and it's a really fun series. So it's like the main series, and then there are 2 sub-series, and my friend and I were like, we haven't read those in a really long time, and I've never listened to it before. And so I am excited listening to the audio. And so those are the 2 books that I am actually reading right now.
So, of all the books that you have read so far, what would be your pick and skip?
All right. So this month I'm actually prepared. Normally you ask me that question. It's a big surprise, and I'm like, I have no idea. So this month for me, my skip was really easy because most of the books I read I really, really liked. So my skip is Gods of Jade and Shadow. It just wasn't that great, and I really wanted it to be, but it wasn't. So that's my skip of the month. And I did want to note that I tried both reading the physical book and listening to the audio because I was like, maybe I'm just reading it too slowly, so I'm not connecting with the characters. And the audio did not improve things at all. So none of the formats appealed to me for that book. And then my pick of the month is Sorcery of Thorns. It was so fun to read a book that I was like, I love this. This book is wonderful. I'm enjoying it so much. So that's definitely my pick this month.
Yay.
So yeah. So what are you reading? And then do you have a pick and skip?
Okay, so currently reading, I am only reading one right now, which is surprising. I feel like I always have multiple. I'm actually reading Lolita, and that is an older classic by Vladimir Nabokov, I think you say that. And I'm pretty sure most people are familiar with the story of Lolita. It's an older man and a much younger girl.
Much younger.
I think she's like 12-ish and he's in his 50s, I want to say. And, when I first I didn't really know quite what the story was about when I started it. So I was a little shocked.
That's right.
And then I thought, oh, wait, I think I have heard of this. And I thought it was more about like him seducing the little girl and all the stuff. But even worse is that they're both in this game.
Yeah.
Now, because she is a child, I feel it's solely his responsibility because she's a child.
Exactly.
But I find it very creepy that she's also like trying to seduce him in some ways. And it's like, why am I reading this? So it's really hard to go through, and I'm actually listening to it. The narrator is Jeremy Irons, so it's narrated very well, and he plays the voice of Scar in the older Lion King. And I also learned that he, in one of the remakes of the movie, he plays one of the characters. He plays the man.
Interesting.
Yeah. So I didn't know that. So I have to kind of do that in little sections because I don't know, it's pretty heavy.
There's an ick factor there.
Yeah, definitely. And I feel like I remember you saying that was on your TBR list at some point, wasn't it?
I have read parts of it. I have never read it in its entirety.
Yeah.
It's one of those books that it's like, oh, I should read that. But then when I think about reading it, I'm like, I'm not in the mood.
Yeah. I don't think you can ever be in the mood to read this one. So
right. And I think that's probably what's going to happen. Yeah.
We'll see if I finish this. As far as my pick and skip go, let's see. You said yours was not a surprise, and I feel like mine kind of is because now I have to make a choice. My skip is honestly, it's hard. It's between The Beast's Heart and I Found You. I'm going to go with skipping The Beast's Heart because I feel like a lot of people, there's a lot of Beauty and the Beast retelling stories that you can pick from, and probably a lot that are great. In fact, you gave some examples on our Facebook page. This one, don't. Just skip it. Move on to the next. Yeah. Beautiful cover. Move on to the next. My pick of the month is a little bit harder because I wasn't terribly blown away by anything. So I think the one, it's going to probably go down to being the Raven Boys for my
I think that was my pick of the month one month too. I'm teasing.
Because compared to everything else that I read, even though it took me a while to get through and it just wasn't, my sweet spot of reading, I enjoyed the fantasy part of it where it kind of escaped from my own world and it was just kind of fun to live in somebody else's world for a while. So that's my pick, and I thought you'd be pleased about that.
Yay!
All right, so Liz.
Yes.
We have something exciting going on, right? Over at our Facebook page, Getting Bookish. And I'm going to let you take the reins on this one.
All right. So Shawna and I have been talking about wanting to do a buddy read. So reading the same book at the same time so that we can talk about it.
And we've even talked about it on the podcast a couple times.
Yeah, because it was something that we were very interested in doing. And we've gotten several books that were like, oh, I have that book too. Like, we should do a buddy read on that. And it just never quite happened until all of a sudden we were like, oh no, I know what we need to buddy read. So we are buddy reading Outlander. Yay. And we are starting tomorrow, October 1st. And we're really, really excited about it. But we're not doing it fast, and we are inviting you to join us. So on our Facebook page, there's an event you can go in and join. There is a reading schedule that, like I said, we're not doing it fast because we are going to be reading other books. Mm-hmm. So whether you're a fast reader or a slow reader or you want to read other things, we're taking 2 full months to go through the book. So there's plenty of time for anyone to join in. And if you don't have the book yet and you're not going to have it for a little bit, it's fine. There's lots of time to join in. But I know that there are people that have already joined the event, and some of them have read the book before, or some of them have just watched the show and they've never read the book. And so there's a whole variety of us reader types over there getting ready to do this together. And I'm excited because it's definitely not a book club.
Yes.
So there won't be like discussion questions that we have to, but there will definitely be discussion. Mm-hmm. And there's not like, if you read part of it and you're like, I don't want to finish this, that's fine. Mm-hmm. Like, we're really just, we wanted to do something fun. And since we were doing it, we were like, oh, we should invite all of our bookish friends to join us. So you can find all of that information on our Facebook page, which is facebook.com/gettingbookish.
And we will be going live on Facebook talking about it.
Yes.
So we're going to, Liz made the schedule. So after we finish that portion, we'll go on and we will chat about it. And like she said, we're not doing, here's your list of 10 discussion questions that I want you to be prepared with.
How does this make you feel?
Right. Just come on and join our chat. Type in, some questions that you had during your read, or if you watched the movie. With the only thing we ask is if that you've already read it or you've already watched the movie. No spoilers. We're just talking about this particular part. So if you start the book late and you want to watch those live events that we do, you can always catch up. Or if you don't even want to read the book, you just want to hear it, how we're describing it, that's fine too. Yeah. So it's very relaxed and informal, because the more like rules or restrictions we put on it, the more it'll feel like a book club, and then neither of us will read it.
Exactly. I am so critical. As soon as a book is like assigned, like a book club book, I read it so critically because I'm not reading it for pleasure anymore. I'm reading it because I have to. And so I am looking forward to this. And we were talking about not wanting to know who was like cast in a show, or like definitely not seeing a movie before we read the book. So this will be different for both Shawna and I, because neither of us have read the book, but both of us, like, I've only seen the first season, but Shawna's seen the show. Yeah. And so we already have that in our minds. And it was really interesting because in the Facebook event, someone commented, they're like, oh my goodness, like, the show is terrible, the book is amazing. And I was like, oh, I thought the show was pretty good. So if I already thought the show was pretty good, I'm real excited to start this.
We're so excited.
Yeah, and we hope you do join us. And if the Outlander doesn't speak to you, I'm sure we will buddy read again, because I think this is going to be extra super fun to do in October and November.
Yeah, I'm excited.
Yay. Me too.
All right, so we will see you next time in season 2, and we hope to see you at our Facebook page and join us for Outlander or just join us for some bookish talk. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for listening. We hope you enjoyed hanging out with us.
Don't forget to check us out on social media and subscribe to our podcast so you don't miss out on any of the fun.
See you next week.